So I'm standing on a beach looking at one of Australia's most beautiful skylines and wondering if this is the place that I should come and study my degree. Where am I? I'm in Perth. But the question for you is, should you come and study in Australia's, in fact the world's most isolated city? In this video, we're going to be talking about the pros and the cons of studying in Perth. How good is this?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Well, I've been coming in and out of the city of Perth for over 20 years, and what I've always loved about this place is once you land at the airport and you come into town, it just feels like the pace of life here is a little bit slower. It's a little bit less stressful than over on the East Coast. Lifestyle in Perth is definitely a bit more outdoors, so if you love the outdoors, you love beautiful natural environments, then this really is a great city. It's got some of the most beautiful metropolitan beaches that you'll find anywhere in the country, and there's heaps of upside. If you love getting out, you love running, biking, the natural outdoors, there are plenty of options for you. So even though the pace of life is maybe a little bit slower here, it's still a major city, so you have all of the advantages. Right over there, you do have this CBD area, and all of the biggest companies in Australia have some of their headquarters here too, so have got a presence in Perth. That means if you're worried about, for example, getting internships as part of your degree, there are plenty of options still here in the city. Are there as many options here as in the major metropolitan centres of Sydney and Melbourne? Well, no, of course not, and maybe that's a bit of a negative because there are fewer people, there are fewer companies in general. Well, there may be fewer companies here, but there are also fewer students, so it's always going to be that trade-off. Would that be a deal breaker for me? No, probably not. On the universities front, there are excellent institutions here in Perth, from the small private Notre Dame University right through to Curtin University, which is the biggest institution in the state. Edith Cowan, Murdoch, and the University of Western Australia make up the suite. And we're going to look at each of those, the pros and cons of those institutions in detail. When it comes to travel, Perth is pretty much closer to Singapore, so closer to Asia than it is to Sydney. If you want to talk about one of the negatives is that in the summertime, there are a lot of flies here, which can be really annoying. Sorry, we're talking about travel. So getting to Perth is easier for you if you're coming from Europe or from Asia. But the isolation is one of the things that really makes this place special. It really has its unique flavour, and I personally find that the people who live in Perth are a bit friendlier than those that you find in the really hustle and bustle of the big metropolitan cities. On the downside, of course, is because we're isolated here over on the West Coast, it's a lot further to come here if you're coming from the eastern side of Australia. So if you're coming from New Zealand or from North America or the Pacific Islands, coming to Perth is going to take a fair chunk more time. Definitely one of the things that might strike you depending on where you come from is that Perth isn't exactly a huge place. It is a major capital city for Australia, so you will find pretty much everything you need. But for some people, if you've come from a really busy city, like somewhere in India or somewhere in Europe, you're going to come here and find like, wow, I've got all of this extra space. What am I going to do with myself here? And it might feel a little bit quiet. But the beautiful thing is as you settle in, you're going to really find that slowing of pace of life is such a pleasant thing. Actually becomes very addictive. Getting around Perth can be a little bit of a challenge. There is a relatively okay public transport system here. There are ferries that go up and down the river. You've got a train line, you've got train lines I should say. You've got buses that do take you through the major suburbs. But if you really want to make the most of living in Perth, you're probably going to need a car in order to get around. On the other side of things, if you are thinking about having your family, friends coming to visit you here, well, Perth is like a lot less famous than Sydney and Melbourne. And so that means that they may actually want to go and travel to the other side of the country, and that's still a very long way away. And maybe there's that kind of element too with some of the universities and degrees, is that they're less famous than some of the big universities over on the East Coast. Should you worry about that? Definitely not. The universities over this side, on the whole, are absolutely extraordinary and have some of the best specialisations in the whole country. So you should always choose an institution that aligns best with you and your interests and what you are hoping to achieve. Don't necessarily just look on paper and be like, Perth? Well, Perth isn't very famous. Perth isn't Sydney or Melbourne. I shouldn't go there. Always consider all of the opportunities, because to me, Perth is one of my two favourite cities in Australia for students. What's the other one? You just have to stick around on the channel to find out. Well, this right here is one of Rob's best kept secrets over in Perth. In fact, one of the best kept secrets in all of Australia, in my opinion. It's the West Australian Shipwrecks Museum. Honestly, this is one of the best museums in the country, in my opinion. There's fascinating displays in here about some of the early European settlers that came to Australia, and unfortunately, those that didn't quite make it. There are extraordinary treasures in this place, and it's really worth coming to check out if you're staying in Perth at some point. Well, I'm feeling a little bit emotional right now, because just across the road there is a place where I pretty much spent every morning for several months when we were traveling around Australia. This is the Wild Bakery, which is just south of Fremantle. And you know, sometimes there are places where you've spent so much time that when you come back to them, I know it feels like you've got this weight, this like tingle of nostalgia, a little bit of sadness. And that's how I'm feeling right now, just looking at that place, because I literally had coffee every morning. The food is fantastic. But I'm back here without my family, and those memories are like off in the distant past. And it's just occurred to me that, you know what? I shouldn't really be standing here feeling nostalgic and worrying about things. I should be thinking about the joy, enjoying the joy. I'm gonna get in there and have myself a bloody good pastry and a coffee and live the good life. Wild Bakery, put it on your list. Awesome coffee. Enjoy the joy. Great to be back, Wild Bakery. I'll be seeing you again sometime. Have a great day, whatever you're getting up to.